VA-11 Hall A, Cyberpunk Bartender Action, or more simply put, Valhalla, is a visual novel set in a bar with a cyberpunk backdrop. You play as Jill, the main bartender of Valhalla, who serves as the vehicle through Glitch City and its colourful cast of characters. The first thing that is going to jump out at you is the visuals. They're very much based around the looks of old PC-88 and PC-98 visual novels, as well as PC Engine, FN Town Smarty, MSX, and whatever other old 80s and 90s Japanese systems. The creators, Christopher Ortiz and Fernando Damas, cited game Excel for the PC-98 as a visual reference, and the correlation between them is very apparent. Although not as detailed and intricate as the games it references, it achieves a very unique and appealing level of style. The game is set over a period of nights, with story sections advancing the day forward once they are completed. You have time in Jill's apartment between sections, where you can look at the news, follow an idol's blog, and go buy random decorative items for the room. You earn money from bartending, which then goes towards buying items, and then the paywall in form of a bill which is necessary to pay to advance chapters. So, just like life, doing well at your job and not buying too much useless crap is necessary to keep the game going. The game's strongest element is its atmosphere. Kicking back to some nice music while serving all kinds of interesting drinks to customers in the rundown back alley bar. Sounds great. So, if atmosphere is the name of the game, why not really hammer it home? Some additional ambient sounds would have really drawn you in. I understand it's meant to emulate PC-98 games, but a bit of extra ambient sound wouldn't ruin that illusion. Using free or even paid stuff online, or getting one of the many bozos in the world with a recorder to go out and record some stuff for you would have been a great addition. And if people would have preferred the game without ambient audio, they just include an SFX slider like most games have. I made some quick ones myself, so just listen. The game features a selectable soundtrack in the form of a jukebox in the bar. So during the majority of the bar sequences, you can pick and select the tracks you want to listen to. And there are a lot of tracks, around 60, with a lot of variety within them. Think vaporwave, synthwave, high NRG, and even ambient styles. So you can tailor how you want the game to sound. You can have a really energetic tone to liven up the bar and tap your foot to. And converse to that, if you want something more soothing to relax and get absorbed into, you can go for the more ambient sounding music choices. It's an interesting approach, which means what each player listens to is going to be different from person to person. But there is a major issue with this. Now, typically the use of music in theatre or media is used to accompany the tone of the scene. Say someone is dying in a scene. You typically wouldn't put in the song I Love Little Girls there. You're not going to hear Brian Eno along to an Abbott and Costello film. It just doesn't fit. So, in Valhalla, you have scenes with many different tones. Silly, serious, sad, introspective, and more. You get the picture. But the soundtrack is picked by you, the player. And you really don't have a very good picture of what is going to occur that day. So you can select your tracks and have the completely wrong music and do a great job at removing the impact of the scene. Here's an example, and this is going to be the only spoiler in the review. Instead of music that matches the tone, that complements and enhances the scene, which a good soundtrack should, you have these scenarios where the player-chosen soundtrack clashes with the scene. A Brian Eno with an Abbott and Costello scenario. The only other sound people are hearing in this game is the soundtrack. And it's a great soundtrack, but no matter how good your soundtrack is, it needs to be used correctly. Player-chosen soundtracks is an interesting idea, but you're taking away a lot of the potential impact your game could have. Mixing drinks is a bit like a pointless minigame. Yeah, there are a few curveballs here and there, but nothing that requires much thought. Even within the system they have in-game, it would have been good if they mixed it up a bit. Like say the computer which gives you the recipes is broken one day and you have to use your memory, or there's a day where one of the 5 ingredients isn't available, and you have to serve drinks based around that limitation. Really basic mix-up material, and the game doesn't even rise to that. The drinks don't serve as just a mini-game though. Branching paths in the game aren't done with dialogue choices like a typical visual novel, but through the drinks you serve. Now, with a couple dozen drinks in the game, you might think that this would lead to many different paths, but for the most part, they take form in minor dialogue changes, and choices seemingly have little lasting effects. Even then, the prompts for these drinks are often quite binary. Did you serve the correct drink or the incorrect drink? Then you go down the path for that choice, which is usually just a short piece of dialogue and in some cases one of the game's endings. So replay value for the branching paths is really not much of a factor, unless you mess up on some of the ending triggers. So it's quite basic by visual novel standards, and the impact your choices have in-game are fairly minimal. That doesn't have to be an issue exactly, depending on the story and how the game is written. So let's talk about that. Plainly put, there are some issues with the writing. And essentially all the issues are rooted in the same problem. That being the writer is thinking more for himself than an audience. Character dialogue will often divulge into random topics. Topics outside relevance to the story, and even worse, topics outside relevance to the characters themselves. Yes, the topics can be interesting, but it can really leave you with a sense of why? Why is this character talking about this? I'm fairly confident I can say why. It's because the writer is very insistent on having his opinions heard, and he has the idea that people will find said opinions very profound. The story can sometimes really come across as a vehicle for the writer's viewpoints, where this character is just this carrier for these topics that the writer wants to talk about. They aren't naturally woven in, they're just dropped in with the amount of subtlety as an empty pot crashing to the floor. These topics and opinions matter more to the writer than having much more natural characters. But other problems arise from the same issue. So when you have the setting of a bar, as well as bartending in your title, you expect certain tropes. The down-on-their-luck guy or gal who goes into the bar and the bartender serves them a drink that changes the patrons' lives. Now, there are some elements of that in Valhalla, but I will say it's absent for the most part. Now, that's fine. And if you want to use particular settings, you shouldn't be forced into their particular tropes. But I will say there needs to be a reason not to go with those tropes. An interesting angle of subversion. But there isn't a subversive angle. And instead of bartending tropes, we have both bar and bartender as instruments of the writer's conjecture. Jill, rather than being the bartender of few words, who throws out a thought here and there, is extremely vocal, and will often talk as much or even more than the patrons. Now, a bartending game should really be more based around the customers and the things they have to do and say, and not around the bartender themselves. Jill's character development should have occurred slowly over time, where she starts out less vocal and begins to become more vocal and opinionated as the story changes around her. give her a bit more of an arc using writing rather than just what is happening within the writing. She can still be opinionated with being much shorter and reserved with her dialogue, but right from the start of the game, she will talk non-stop. I can imagine the origin for a lot of these topics and dialogue for the writer being, how would I respond if this topic was brought up? So Jill essentially comes off as an avatar for the writer, where for the majority of the game she exists to state her opinions to the numerous characters. And that's a poor design for Jill, and once again a very self-focused approach to the writing. The drink should do the talking, not the bartender. Now if you're not going to use bartending tropes, why the setting of a bar? It's the same answer as to why Jill is written the way she is. The bar is merely a convenience for the characters to flock to. The characters will announce the topics the writer is interested in, which then bartender Jill will announce the personal opinions of the writer. The writing often takes turns on a dime, which makes character dialogue feel very unnatural. Characters will go into these topics that the writer wants to talk about, and when these are over, you don't even get a natural transition in the dialogue. And it happens all the time. Once or twice even, you could let it go, but it's very frequent. The game is chock-a-block full of references to stuff. Stupid memes as well. Yeah, I'll be honest and say I chuckled at times, but it was really more dumb and distracting than it is funny. Your writing is really going to be stronger without in-jokes. You may think I'm being too critical on Valhalla, but it comes from a caring place. I can say that I actually quite enjoyed myself, and there were characters I did get attached to. I think there were a lot of nice details, and there are definitely some witty sections where I had a chuckle. There are some interesting world elements, and I like the fact that despite it's a cyberpunk environment, it's stuck to issues that resonate with common people. There are hints at greater things going on, but you get them from the same perspective that you or I might see them. I don't think Damas is a terrible writer, and I think he has a beyond basic understanding of how to write a world and characters. But I do think he's a bit self-absorbed with his own thoughts to the point where it sabotages the overall project. He cannot resist the temptation to hijack one of his own characters and force them to say what he wants, rather than it naturally come to the character. And if certain elements seem like they might not match the character, don't put them in. It's that simple. You might say I'm taking the game too seriously, but I'm critiquing it based on what the game is giving me. If the game was nothing but stupid, dumb anime cliches and memeing, then I'd be like, okay, the game is just going for being silly and having a fun time to some good music. Getting into the details of the writing isn't important. But if you're going to come out with serious subject matter that's meant to parallel with believable characters, then I'm going to seriously critique you in kind. Think of it as tough love, because it comes from a place of love. I can really see the potential in Sukeban games. They have the vision, but they don't quite have the refinement just yet.